me. Been inspired by so many colleagues esteemed across the day. And what's really interesting, as you'll hopefully kind of pick out from my presentation, is within the education space, we don't have the same resources like kind of colleagues had in the banking sector or finance sector. So there's an awful lot of learning which kind of spans, I guess, my domain, which I have to kind of then share and impart back within the sector. But it's great to hear firsthand from the experts. My aim during this presentation will be to give you all at least one thing to take away, and hopefully the research that forms the kind of second part of the presentation will certainly raise some questions and provocation for you to consider with your respective teams. But as introduced, I'm Jonny Wathen, former CIO of Wellspring Trust and CIO for the Transformative Group, which is an organisation working with MATs up and down the country on their digital transformation journeys. So over the course of the next kind of 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk a little bit about Wellspring, give you the context that I work within, but also then about the applied research and the forward path. So Wellspring is an organisation that runs 28 schools, and across the north of England, multi-site provision, which is thinking in around sort of 40 or so different locations, and we've got around 2,000 employees. I've been at the organisation for the past 4.5 years, and we've doubled in size during that time. And we are set to double again over the next kind of 4 years. So tremendous and rapid growth is that context that we've been working through. Not going to go through all the kind of accolades and achievements, but I think two really important ones. We were kind of recognised for our practice in terms of the this year's MAT of the year, and we also were identified for our practice around wellbeing, being a people-centred organisation. It's not just about saying we do wellbeing; it's about having that throughout all our kind of process considerations and around our practice. And so those two awards were just two that I felt important to share with colleagues today. Like some organisations, we try to operate, and we do operate at a very high level of local autonomy. We need to make that decision making at the coalface, and our head teachers and school leaders and principals are doing that tremendously. And when you put the factor of COVID that we've all heard today into the mix, it's been a really challenging couple of years for them, in addition to the rest of the job. We do try to take a relational approach to what we do, and the reason why we do that is it's about working with people. And we've heard throughout all the presentations today that this is about people-centred change management. So we know what the technology does, and we know how to realise its potential. But if we don't deliver that through that change programme in a relational way, we're not going to get the sustainability benefits that come out of that. There's going to be all the conflict and problems that may arise. So we operate in that inclusive manner. We endeavour to be quite agile. We have that opportunity because the sector as a whole is quite immature in the sense that MATs have only been around really for probably the past 10 years or so. So that just gives you a little bit of information about our culture. What we've achieved, again, over the last 4 years has been varying degrees of success, but a few of the highlights there is we've moved across from an on-premise infrastructure and architecture for school-based management information. All our schools now enjoy a cloud-based productivity platform, and we've also moved on to Google Workspace. And what that's enabled us to do is start to level up across the domains of security, around information governance, around kind of privacy, as well as delivering higher quality ed tech. And in line with the COVID response, being able to deliver remote education alongside remote or hybrid working is also another achievement there. But moving forwards, we're trying to continue in this new normal, new way of working, and we've rolled out 32 digital hubs across our kind of community, and that is based on the kind of Google Meet hardware interfacing, which allows not only our trustees and our board members to have their meetings at the highest level, but also allows our practitioners to share through kind of subject specialist networks. And again, some of this may sound really, really simple and straightforward. That's because it is. It's about how do we connect, how do we communicate and how do we collaborate. The rest then is kind of down to the individual teams. So having set the scene, the research that I undertook for an MBA program was looking at how do you achieve that digital transformation? How do you work through those, whether it's a systems kind of implementation, or whether it's changing a culture around GDPR, like we've just heard from the previous presentation, and how do you do that in a growing organisation? And one of the things that kind of came out of the research was this notion of business models are how we create value for customers. Digital transformation is kind of what happens when we bring those two concepts together. And there wasn't a tremendous amount of research out there at the time. There was a lot on digital transformation, there was a lot on business model innovation, but bringing those two together wasn't really kind of anything beyond maybe a few studies in the finance sector. So I started off by looking at those definitions really, and throughout history we've all recognised that yes, we can derive efficiencies and we can gain competitive advantage, and we can start to change how we do things, and you often hear the Netflix model or the Amazon model in terms of the different ways of working and how disruptive technologies can change. But how do you do that within a school's education sector? You know, we've been going to the same classrooms and been taught in the same way for many years. And then you throw a global pandemic in there, and we have to deliver education from home, or from home to children's homes. How do you do that in disadvantaged communities where they don't even have broadband connections? You know, they may have a single mobile phone in the house. So these are some of the challenges that I think collectively as a society we need to be addressing. In terms of the rationale, I won't go through the details. If anyone is interested in the kind of the background to it, I will pick that up afterwards. But the objectives really were to start to understand what is the potential for this transformation within my sector, and hopefully it's relatable. So the second bullet point you can see here was around talking to leaders, and one of the things that kind of the research findings will go on to is around perceptions. We talk about digital transformation often, but what does that definition mean? And I think if I asked everybody in the room to write down their definition, it might be slightly different even within this group. And secondly, it was then, okay, well, once we've got that definition, how can we apply it to strategy and to operation? So I did my research. I'll spare you the details. And we went through getting some of these definitions, and you can see here around digitalisation and digital transformation being three key areas that we had to discern the difference between, because the leaders didn't know that. And question, how many conversations you've had within your organisations around interpretation of these terms? Heard lots of new buzzwords today, and again it's about getting that common shared understanding of what that means. And from a business model perspective, we've heard a lot about the why, in terms of why do we do things, customer-centred and trying to support customers both internally and externally. But what processes do we have in place to go through this innovation cycle? Are we finding the time within our respective teams to look at all these different dimensions? And are we just changing one of those dimensions, or are we changing multiple dimensions when it comes to your value proposition, profit generation, value creation, and so on? And so we started to apply kind of this model, which was starting with a strategy, but then bring it back down to that architectural level. And it was great to hear in the last presentation about bringing those teams together and having that conversation. And going through that process allowed us to build kind of collegiate and well understood processes across the organisation, rather than having that siloed approach to data or data management, or lack of communication within that. And again, this is another really good graphic around it's called the 4 Eyes framework, and this was another methodology that we applied when we started to look at how do we start designing these business model innovation processes. Within our sector, it isn't something that happens by default. It's probably more akin to the commercial kind of sector, but this is something that we now are starting to embed in our annual cycle of business, and challenging ourselves to look at those external drivers like we heard about earlier, but also look at those internal aspects which might be between different departments. And so the findings that kind of came out from this particular piece of research was when you talked about digital transformation, the words that kept coming back were, oh, it's about infrastructure. You know, we don't have the necessary infrastructure within our schools. We certainly don't have it when children and young people are going home to be educated. It's about systems, you know, we need another system to fix that problem. And well, why are you doing it? Well, we try to generate efficiencies or be more effective, or because somebody said it was a good idea to do some ed tech. And that was quite interesting, because that was through every conversation that I had with the senior leaders of these organisations, that these bold aspects kept coming through time and time again. I then said to them, well, what are the barriers? You know, what are the perceived barriers of that transformation if you're going to undertake it? And it came back that, again, infrastructure, nothing works, nothing integrates. We've got schools that are joining us, coming with many years of legacy, sort of underinvestment. The systems don't talk to each other. All the same challenges that I guess you guys will have faced at some different time within there. And there's also no capability and capacity within the organisation to drive this change forward. As a CIO for an organisation, I think I was the first CIO within the sector, and there's since probably been a handful of people doing that role. A lot of it tends to fall down to IT network managers and other roles. So I think there is something there with colleagues within different industries. How can you give back some of your expertise to the sector, whether it's through governing bodies or whether it's through being a non-exec on a trust board? Because I think it's really needed within the MAT space. But more importantly, on a management perspective, I think they need to start to invest in different services, and that's why I've kind of pursued the venture in the transformative group to be able to support schools up and down the country. The third aspect of the findings was around, well, how do you bring about this change? And you can see the two that are jumping out here around stakeholder engagement and communication. That is the crux of it. Once you've got the technology in place, if you focus on those two things, that's where you're going to get the biggest impact in terms of delivery. So in summary, these were the kind of findings, and again, nothing new, nothing rocket science, but within our sector space, it's about delivering that capability and capacity that is not there. We need to address that. We recognise that there's not a one-size-fits-all. This is not about getting a platform product. This is about making it bespoke to the organisation. But we feel that having that digital strategy that underpins your corporate strategy and vision, focusing on the aspects around infrastructure, innovation, security, privacy, and data and insights will bring about the biggest rewards. And so how did we do that? At Wellspring, we took an ambidexterity approach, which was to test and learn, do pilots, and when they are approved as being successful and scalable, we bring that back in line with our core processes. And this can be applied within any sector. So again, we've seen different levels of innovation labs, or I heard this morning that there was sort of teams centrally or decentralised, depending on the maturity of your organisation. And using this kind of approach allows you to fail, it allows you to make mistakes, and it also allows you to innovate and maintain that competitive advantage as you move forwards. And we did it through starting to focus on digitalisation rather than digital transformation as a term, because a lot of what we needed to do was that first step, and taking both of those steps together with maybe changing the business model, thinking about how we can operate differently, would lead to ultimately transformation in the medium term. And what kind of then is the next steps for us, and it was pleasing to hear about digital maturity assessments in the last presentation, as I said, because that was really where we got to as a sector. We need to understand ourselves better, we need to improve our information governance approaches, and we need to start thinking into the medium and longer term. There's a big space for platform economies. When you look at your business models, how many platform as a service are you using? How many of those solution providers are strategic partners, or are they just a piece of software that you're using? And when you think about your business models, how much of it has been outsourced or brought in-house, and why? And then finally, the impact of any disruptive technologies on sustainable growth of mats is another area for exploration. So I'm going to pause there because I'm conscious I've kind of run up to the 4 o'clock mark almost. But this is just some last minute kind of takeaways really. This is how we have enabled hybrid working. We've talked about ESG in terms of the sustainable practices and governance. We've taken an open innovation approach. We learn from all stakeholders, both within and beyond the organisation. And then finally, we're working very closely with a number of key partners from a platform as a service perspective, and that's our journey thus far. Thank you very much.